For years, Hadeel Assali heard about a distant uncle of hers whose life story was hard to believe. That he was one of many whose lives were changed by an Israeli deportation scheme back in the late 60s. She heard that story over and over again growing up.
My mother, when she told me, you have this uncle in Amman, she said, he was in South America for some reason. I think he was involved in something. I don't know much about it. You could ask him about it. He just had this kind of mysterious story around him that nobody quite knew the details of.
Until one day, she decided to find out the truth for herself. My name is Maxim Saakyan.
And my name is Nadeen Shaker.
And you're listening to Uncovering Roots. This is Palestinians in Paraguay, Part 1, The Scheme.
It's 2005. Hadeel and her brother fly to Amman. They're there to meet their great-uncle Mahmoud. It's the first time they meet, and they know very little about him.
When we met him, we had basically arrived at his flat, their house. It was a very kind of modest, humble place. I remember him very tall and lanky, dark-skinned, very handsome, surprisingly young-looking for his age. And he was just very kind and curious. Everybody was curious, My brother and I had arrived quite tired, and so they left us to rest for a bit and then came back with a big platter full of olives and cheese and eggs and stuff. And then once we were rested, the 4 kids, my uncle and his wife, they sat around and just asked us questions, and we asked them questions. We didn't have a whole lot of time. And at some point I did ask him about this question.
And the question went something like this. How did you get from Gaza to South America? And what happened there?
He did tell me the basics of the story, and I found it quite, I wouldn't say far-fetched, but I found it really hard to believe.
Mahmoud then goes to tell her bits and pieces of this crazy story that happened to him back in 1969.
Well, he says that he signed up for what he thought was a worker program, that there was a worker program being advertised in Gaza. But, at the time, there was a lot of people going out to work, a lot of people leaving Gaza to go work elsewhere. Like his brother had gone to Germany as part of a legitimate program. Many were going to the Gulf states. So he was kind of in this climate where it was kind of the norm for young people to go out to work because Israel was actively de-developing the economy. Like there was no jobs, not many jobs for them. So he signed up for what he thought was a worker program.
The worker program was in Brazil.
And they told him to go to this travel agency called Petra, and that they boarded the plane, but when they landed in Brazil, they were not allowed to disembark. The way he describes it, there were armed guards that told them, actually, you're going to Paraguay, and they put them on a different, smaller plane to Paraguay. And so that's what happened. And they landed in Asuncion, Paraguay. Once they arrived, they realized that there were several who had been sent out this way before them. And that's when they realized it was all a big trick, that there was no worker program.
Hadeel was shocked when hearing this. Could it be true? Was her great-uncle Mahmoud really tricked by the Israelis? All kinds of questions swelled in her head.
I stay hung up on this moment when he must have found out that it was a trick,
She's so hung up on her great-uncle's story that she decides to personally investigate what happened to him. But what she actually uncovers is the Paraguay scheme. A secret plan the Israelis called immigration, but actually it was an experiment in ethnic cleansing. This is the story of that scheme and the lives of the men it destroyed.
So, what was your reaction when you first heard about this story? And how did you relate to it personally?
This is El-Kouny, one of our co-producers on this series, and who brought us the story.
Well, for me, it's just shocking that a 19-year-old kid could be tricked like this, someone who's trying to build his life, trying to find stability, that someone could be so cruel to send them out and just leave them to their, destiny like that. And I guess the reason it resonated with me, or that it struck me so much, is because, I myself was stateless until I turned 22. So at his age, I was stateless. I was also searching for stability. Obviously, very different context. I was in the United States already, but I didn't know if we would be able to stay, if I would be deported, like just that condition of statelessness. I wasn't that much older than him at 19 when I met him. So also just kind of identifying with that youthful sort of hope for having an adventure. He thought he was going to go work in Brazil. I'm sure he heard a lot of wonderful things about Brazil. People are big fans of football or soccer. There's a certain romance that comes with Brazil. So I can imagine he was fairly excited about it until he was not, until I'm sure, like in Arabic, the word sadma, in Saddam, it wasn't what he was told it would be. Instead was taken to a place where he just had never even heard of.
Hadeel couldn't let go of the story. She wanted proof. So she left her career as an engineer and decided to pursue doctoral studies in social science research at Columbia University. The first thing she did was hit the university archives.
In the very first seminar, I met somebody who found an archival document and shared it with me that this was actually an official government scheme. So that was a pretty big moment for me. If you give me a second, I can actually pull it up and read it to you. A second.
The document was from May 1969, and Hadeel read it closely.
And then May 1969, it is hereby decided to approve the Mossad proposal regarding the emigration of 60,000 from the administered territories to Paraguay in accordance with the following. A, the Israeli government will finance the travel expenses of the immigrants to Paraguay. B, the Israeli government will make sure that every migrant will be supplied with $100 for initial living expenses. C, the Israeli government will pay the Paraguay government $33 for each immigrant. And D, upon signing the agreement, a sum of $350,000 will be paid for the migration of 10,000 people, sort of like an advance. So that's the translation of it.
There it was, in plain sight, an Israeli plan to move 60,000 people from Gaza to Paraguay. The government would fund their travel and living expenses, and even pay the refugees and the Paraguay government themselves. The document was produced by the Ministerial Committee for the Administrated Territories, basically the Israeli government. This document made Hadeel's great-uncle's story so much more real to her. She had the proof she was looking for to really believe him.
It was just a family story this whole time until this document. I think the first feeling was just vindication and a sense that I should keep going because I had just kind of hit all these sort of dead ends and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to go anywhere with it. And then I ended up kind of on many other sort of research rabbit holes related to it.
One of those rabbit holes led Hadeel back to Mahmoud. She wanted his full story.
So Mahmoud was born in 1949. When 1948 happened, Mahmoud wasn't born yet. The family was kicked out on the little boats and taken on a ship and brought around to El-Kouny in Egypt. And that's where Mahmoud was born, in a camp in El-Kouny. And he was there for about a year, where they were all taken back to Gaza to a camp called Al-Maghazi. So he was born in Kouny, but grew up in Maghazi camp. We listened to a lot of family stories, both from him and the others. And Mahmoud was kind of a tough kid, just someone that you don't mess with in the neighborhood. But he also had a lot of conflicts with his father. And actually, it was his conflicts with his father that led him to sign up to leave.
By 1967, Mahmoud would have been in his late teens when Gaza came under Israeli military occupation as a result of the Six-Day War.
And Israel shall be a proverb among all peoples. Across the deserts of Sinai, a biblical prophecy comes to pass as the forces of Israel sweep on in an astonishing triumph of strategy.
All of a sudden, Mahmoud found himself living under a ruthless occupation. Israel also pursued a strategy of de-development to run down the local economy. As a result, many young Palestinians left to work abroad.
Mahmoud was the oldest that was remaining. His oldest sister had gone out. His older brother had gone to work in Germany. And so his father was begging him to stay because he needed his help, to just manage things. But he had all these conflicts with his father, and that's why he decided to sign up.
He heard about this program that was being advertised to go work in Brazil just for a year or two.
I mean, the way he describes it is that it was partly word of mouth, that there's this program in Brazil. According to him, he says they were offered big money at the scale of 3,000 a month, which is huge back then, right? And that you just need to go sign up at these travel agencies. Later, I learned that these travel agencies were set up by this secret team that was trying to get young people out, right? To transfer Palestinians out. The travel agency had several offices. The main one now is in Tel Aviv, but it was called Petra. But the testimonies from the other men, as well as Mahmoud, say that basically they were told to go to this travel agency and sign up, that they spoke to this man named Gad Graver, who was the owner of this travel agency, and they were basically put on a plane and flown out.
Please remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened anytime the seatbelt.
On September 9th, 1969, Mahmoud left Gaza on a flight allegedly heading to Brazil, against his father's wishes. When he landed, Israeli authorities gave him some cash and a few nights' stay in a hotel, and then, no contact. The money they were lured by to resettle in Paraguay never came in. The promised jobs, a lie, and no way to return back home. It wasn't long before they realized the work program was a scam. The tape you're about to hear is from one of the interviews Hadeel had with Mahmoud. She asks him, "Who do you think is responsible for what happened to you?"
انت مين حسب رأيك المسؤول على اللي صار لك؟
طبعا دولة إسرائيل.
طب واللي في الباراغواي؟
اللي في الباراغواي ايش دخلهم؟ مين اللي طلعني من غزة؟ مش دولة إسرائيل؟ مين اللي منحني السي؟ مش دولة إسرائيل؟ حكومة إسرائيل؟
You can hear in Mahmoud's voice how angry he is, still, and of course. Here he was answering the state of Israel. Paraguay? What do they have to do with it? Who exiled me from Gaza? Was it not the state of Israel?
Of course, he says he was shocked, but also what can I do? What could we do about it? They were given a laissez-passer to travel on that had an expiration date.
This pass is a diplomatic travel document.
So they were basically out of luck because you don't have the money to just fly back. It was hard for them to kind of come up with that kind of money. There's really no actual work there. So I think he himself got into survival mode mostly. When he got to Asuncion, he started picking up Spanish right away, started asking bus drivers, and he learned it very quickly. He says he got a girlfriend, he got work basically going to Brazil and picking up jeans. Apparently denim was kind of new and hot at this time. So there, there was a lot of Arab merchants throughout South America that were into textiles, like the Palestinians in Chile. So he got a job working trade between Brazil and Paraguay, bringing jeans and selling them.
Mahmoud wasn't the only one adapting to survive. While some, like him, found work in the informal economy, others were organizing, looking for any authority that might help them expose what had happened.
Later, a group of them went to, there's other Arab consulates in Paraguay, and they went to them for help, Mahmoud included. The Arab consulates attempted to confront the Israeli consulate. Of course, the Israeli ambassador at the time, his name was Varon, V-A-R-O-N.
Benjamin Weiser Varon was no ordinary diplomat. A self-proclaimed Zionist, he'd spent decades in Latin America, first as a journalist, then lobbying governments for the World Zionist Organization. By the time Golda Meir, the president of Israel, appointed him ambassador to Paraguay, he was one of Israel's most seasoned operators in the region.
He actually has a memoir where he says he had no idea why these Palestinians were there. But of course, later it's known that he was part of the coordination of receiving them there. So that was what Mahmoud and his group did. Another group apparently went to the authorities and gave these testimonies that are now in the archive.
Those testimonies and the men who gave them would eventually be discovered by a historian researching something entirely different.
Something was unique there. I found these depoimentos, these testimonies of just a lot of Palestinians from Gaza. They had one thing in common. They were Palestinians displaced.
This is John Tawfiq Karam, a professor and director of Lehman Center for Brazilian Studies at the University of Illinois.
He was doing research in secret intelligence archives in Paraguay that belonged to Alfredo Stroessner, a dictator who ruled Paraguay from 1954 until his overthrow in 1989.
The nickname is known as Archivo del Terror, the Archive of Terror, because this is where all the documentation that can speak to the violences of state terrorism were held.
To understand what John found, you need to understand what the Archive of Terror is, the one belonging to Alfredo Stroessner.
For decades, Paraguay was ruled by Alfredo Stroessner, a military dictator who came to power in 1954, where he became the longest-lived dictatorship in South America. It's worth pausing on who exactly Israel was courting here. Stroessner's regime was notorious for its Nazi sympathies, but Varón saw little contradiction. In his memoir, he was blunt. Israel was under steady attack from the communist world, and therefore the enemy of our enemy had to be our friend. He met with Stroessner personally and praised his government. He compared the role that Paraguay played in Latin America to the role Israel played, telling Stroessner that Israel was a wall to the communist penetration in the Middle East. Varón informed Stroessner that Israel would provide his regime with technical assistance if he promised to vote in favor of Israel at the United Nations Security Council. And to his delight, Stroessner agreed.
And maybe this is why the two countries worked closely on this. Stroessner's regime was brutal. Disappearances, torture, political repression, and they kept countless records of it. When Stroessner was finally overthrown in 1989, this massive trove of documents was discovered.
In the aftermath, they realized that he left all his intelligence services. A lot of those papers were left. They discovered, this is how they discovered Operation Condor, this transnational state terrorism network, because Stroessner saved everything from that period.
The archive contains surveillance records, interrogation reports, correspondence between security forces. It's a window into how authoritarian regimes operated in Latin America.
John was researching Arab immigration to South America. He was interested in Syrian and Lebanese communities, their migration patterns, and how they built lives in the region.
Now, John wasn't looking for Palestinians, but buried among the files, he found something unexpected.
In that same archive, I began to find all these Arab names, Muslim names, Muhammad, and not a few, I would say hundreds.
And so he dug deeper and deeper and read all the testimonies.
And they all told a very similar story, that an Israeli travel agency had promised them a work abroad program, and they could leave and then work and then come back to Palestine, to Gaza. And so they signed these documents in Hebrew that they didn't understand. And then suddenly they arrive in Paraguay. The main element that cuts through all of the sworn statements given by 11 or so Gazans, Palestinians from Gaza, is that they were 1948 refugees, almost entirely.
These were men who had already been displaced once in 1948. Now, they were being displaced again.
To give a couple of examples, Farid Shaheen was a 28-year-old who was born in Al-Magdal, coastal Arab village that became the Israeli city of Ascalon after 1948. Farid Shaheen maybe, resettled in Gaza, worked as a chauffeur driver before he departed. Abdul Qadir El-Izardi, a 23-year-old painter, had related that his birthplace was Yibna in Palestine, but his place of departure was, in his words, un campamento de refugiados in Gaza, a refugee camp in Gaza. Abu Kamel, 30-year-old language teacher, was traveling with his wife and 5 children. He was born in Jaffa, Palestine, and he departed from Sabra, Gaza. And so almost all the others as well were displaced from Palestine in 1948 and resettled in Gaza and were part of this so-called refugee problem that had troubled at the time Prime Minister Eshkol and his cabinet.
But John discovered something else. When the men arrived in Paraguay, their documents disappeared.
So according to them, travel agents used their travel papers to check them into hotels in Asunción and then took their travel papers, which basically left all 20 or so Palestinians. So this is including the heads of the households as well as spouses and children. It basically left them without any documented evidence of where they came from, of how they got into Paraguay.
John found testimonies from at least 11 men. But their stories didn't end there. After giving their testimonies to Paraguayan police, most of them simply disappeared from the historical record.
And it does suggest that the Israeli officials really wanted to shield themselves from any kind of paper trail. And this was part of sort of the discussion of how would a transfer scheme such as this work out. In these high-level meetings, there was always an emphasis on really eliminating any possibility that the transfer of Palestinians to South America could be traced back to Israeli officials. The trail of these individuals that gave their testimonies to the Paraguayan police, their trail almost completely fades. And if it weren't for the shooting that occurred in May 1970, they might have gone really unnoticed.
May 4th, 1970. 2 Palestinian men arrive on the steps of the Israeli diplomatic office in Asunción. They walk in and demand to speak with the Israeli ambassador, Binyamin Weiser Varon.
They were told he wasn't there, and so they left and waited a while. And they waited and they waited, and then they realized that probably they were lying to them. So they went back up. And he said that that's the moment when the guards started attacking them, and that him and Khalid wrestled the guns away from the guard. He says that when they went to shoot at the ambassador, he hid behind a secretary, and the secretary got killed. I don't know. You know, it's a big mystery, like, what actually happened in that moment.
The shooting on May 4th, 1970, made front-page headlines, not only in Paraguay, but in Brazil, in Spain, in the US. In the Chicago Tribune, an article dating, it was May 5th, 1970, it was the day after the shooting. And this is the title, Arabs Invade Israeli Embassy in Paraguay, Kill Envoy's Wife. 2 pistol-wielding Arab terrorists opened fire inside the Israeli embassy here today, killing the wife of an embassy official and seriously wounding the ambassador's secretary. Both men were arrested within minutes after they fled from the downtown building housing the embassy.
These 2 men were called Khalid Kassab and Talal Al-Dimasi.
يعني ممكن تعرفنا بنفسك تقول لنا اسمك وفين محل سكنك حاليا
اسمي طلال الدماسي.
My name is Talal Al-Dimasi.
حضرتك من فين أصلا؟
أنا من غزة.
I'm from Gaza. I live in Paraguay in Latin America.
Next up, the 1970 shooting in Ascension, which exposed how Gazans suddenly ended up in Paraguay in the early 70s. This episode was co-produced by me, Maxim Saakyan, Nada El-Kouny, and Nadeen Shaker, as well as story editing by myself and Nadeen. Sound design by me, with support from Ross Burns. Thank you for listening to Uncovering Roots, and see you in the second episode. Take care.